Dave Mustaine swore revenge after Metallica fired him in 1983. He created Megadeth with one mission: destroy the band that destroyed him. Every album was a declaration of war. Every interview was an attack. For 28 years, he fought to prove they'd made the biggest mistake of their lives. But on December 10, 2011, the battle finally ended, not with a winner, but with something neither side expected. To understand why this moment was so significant, you need to know the story of how Dave Mustaine became Metallica's greatest enemy. In 1981, a young guitarist from California answered an ad in a local newspaper. Metallica was looking for a lead guitarist, and Dave Mustaine was exactly what they needed: technically brilliant, aggressive, creative, and hungry for success. Along with James Hetfield and Lars Ulrich, Mustaine became one of the founding members of what would become one of the biggest bands in rock history. For 2 years, Mustaine was an integral part of Metallica. He co-wrote several songs that would appear on their debut album. His guitar work defined their early sound. He was there in the cramped rehearsal spaces, the tiny club shows, the long drives in beat-up vans. He was building something with these guys, or so he thought. But Mustaine had a problem. He was an alcoholic, and his drinking was getting worse. Arguments became fights. Fights became physical altercations. The tension in the band grew unbearable. Hetfield and Ulrich saw Mustaine's talent, but they also saw someone who was out of control, someone whose addiction was threatening to destroy everything they were building. On April 11, 2011, everything came to a head. Metallica was in New York about to record their first album. The night before the recording sessions were supposed to start, Ulrich and Hetfield made a decision. They woke Mustaine up early in the morning and told him he was out of the band. No warning, no second chance, just pack your things and go. They handed him a bus ticket back to California and told him his services were no longer needed. Kirk Hammett, who'd been playing with a band called Exodus in San Francisco, was already on his way to New York to replace him. Mustaine was devastated. He'd helped build Metallica from nothing, co-written their songs, defined their sound, and now he was being thrown out like garbage, replaced before he'd even left the building. The humiliation was crushing. The rejection was unbearable. But more than anything, Mustaine felt betrayed. That bus ride back to California became legendary in metal history. Mustaine sat alone for days, drinking, crying, and burning with rage. By the time the bus pulled into Los Angeles, he'd made a decision. He was going to form his own band, and that band was going to be faster, heavier, and more successful than Metallica. He was going to make them regret firing him for the rest of their lives. He named his new band MEGADETH, a play on the term MEGADETH, 1 million deaths from a nuclear explosion. It was aggressive, apocalyptic, and perfectly captured the fury driving him. From the very beginning, Megadeth existed as the anti-Metallica. Every decision Mustaine made was designed to compete with, challenge, or surpass his former band. When Metallica went in one direction, Mustaine went another. When they found success, he worked harder to find his own. And at every opportunity, in every interview, he made sure people knew what Metallica had done to him. The attacks were relentless. Mustaine called them sellouts when they signed to a major label. He called them thieves for using riffs he claimed to have written. He suggested their success was built on stealing his ideas. In magazine interviews, on MTV, at award shows, anywhere he could find a microphone, he made sure people knew his version of the story. The animosity became part of both bands' identities. Metallica fans would mock Megadeth as the bitter runner-up. Megadeth fans would defend Mustaine as the real genius, the one with actual musical talent. Message boards and metal magazines were battlegrounds where fans fought proxy wars on behalf of their chosen bands. And when Metallica achieved massive commercial success with their self-titled album in 1991, becoming the biggest metal band in the world, Mustaine's bitterness only intensified. He'd watch MTV play Enter Sandman on repeat and feel the wound reopen. He'd see them sell out stadiums while Megadeth played smaller venues and wonder what could have been.
But here's the thing. Megadeth was also incredibly successful. They became one of the big four of thrash metal alongside Metallica, Slayer, and Anthrax. They sold millions of albums. They headlined massive tours. They earned Grammy nominations. By any objective measure, Dave Mustaine had won. He'd built an incredible career despite being fired. But it wasn't enough. Because no matter how successful Megadeth became, Metallica was always bigger. They were the ones who became global superstars. They were the ones selling out stadiums. They were the ones being inducted into the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame. And Mustaine couldn't let it go. 20 years passed, then 25, and still, in interviews, he would bring up being fired from Metallica. Still, he would express his anger and resentment. The wound never healed. Then came 2004 and the release of a documentary that would change everything. Metallica had hired filmmakers to document the making of their album Saint Anger. What was supposed to be a simple behind-the-scenes look turned into something much more intense, a raw examination of a band falling apart. The documentary, called Some Kind of Monster, showed Metallica going through therapy, fighting with each other, and confronting decades of unresolved issues. And in one of the most memorable scenes in the film, James Hetfield reached out to Dave Mustaine. They met at a coffee shop in San Francisco with cameras rolling to talk about what had happened in 1983. The scene was uncomfortable from the start. Mustaine arrived defensive, arms crossed, ready for confrontation. Hetfield seemed genuinely interested in making peace, but unsure how to bridge the decades-long gap. They talked in circles for a while, surface-level conversation that avoided the real issues. Then Hetfield asked a simple question. "Are you happy?" And something broke open. On camera, in front of millions of people who would eventually see the documentary, Dave Mustaine began to cry. Not just tearing up, but genuinely sobbing, the emotion pouring out of him after more than 20 years. "I couldn't be in the biggest band in the world," Mustaine said through tears, his voice breaking with each word. "Everything I do, I think about how much better Metallica is doing. I wanted to be you guys." It was a moment of raw vulnerability from someone who'd spent 2 decades projecting nothing but anger and defiance. And it revealed the truth. The feud wasn't really about music or business or artistic differences. It was about rejection, about feeling like he wasn't good enough, about watching from the outside as his former friends achieved the dreams he'd helped them start chasing. Hetfield, clearly uncomfortable with Mustaine's pain, tried to offer comfort, but the meeting ended awkwardly, unresolved. If anything, it seemed to confirm that the wound was too deep to heal. 7 years passed. Metallica continued their career. Megadeth continued theirs. The feud, while less publicly toxic than before, still simmered. Fans of both bands still argued online about who was better, who'd wronged whom, whether Mustaine should just move on. Then, in 2011, Metallica decided to celebrate their 30th anniversary with 4 special concerts at the Fillmore in San Francisco, the legendary venue that had been crucial to their early career. These wouldn't be normal Metallica shows. They would be for fan club members only, limited to about 1,500 people per night, with tickets priced at just $6, the same price a Fillmore ticket in 1981.
For these special shows, Metallica decided to do something unprecedented. They would invite former members to join them on stage. Jason Newsted, who'd played bass with them for 15 years before leaving in 2001, would return. Ron McGovney, their original bassist, would make an appearance. And they would invite Dave Mustaine. The invitation was sent, and Mustaine faced a decision that would define the next chapter of his life. He could refuse and continue the feud indefinitely, maintaining his anger for however many years he had left. Or he could accept and face the ghosts that had haunted him for 28 years. He chose to accept. December 10th, 2011, the Fillmore in San Francisco. The 4th and final night of Metallica's anniversary shows. The crowd of 1,500 die-hard fans knew something special was happening.
Former members had appeared at previous shows, and rumors had circulated that Mustaine might show up. When James Hetfield stepped to the microphone between songs and said, "We have a very special guest tonight," the crowd erupted. Some were cheering, some were holding their breath. "This is someone who was a very important part of Metallica's history," Hetfield continued. "Someone who helped create the sound that became this band. Someone I'm proud to call back to this stage. Please welcome Dave Mustaine." The crowd's reaction was mixed. Some screamed with joy. Others seemed uncertain about what was about to happen. This was unprecedented. Dave Mustaine, who'd spent nearly 3 decades attacking Metallica at every opportunity, was about to walk onto their stage. Mustaine appeared from backstage, carrying his signature guitar, a flying V that had been his weapon of choice throughout his career with Megadeth. He looked nervous, almost vulnerable, a stark contrast to the aggressive persona he'd cultivated for so long. His hands were shaking slightly as he plugged in his guitar. The walk from backstage to center stage probably took only 15 seconds, but it must have felt like an eternity. Every step was a step back through time, back through 28 years of anger, hurt, and competition, back to 1983 when he'd been part of this band. As he walked to center stage, the other members of Metallica approached him. Lars Ulrich, who'd been part of the decision to fire him all those years ago, stepped forward first. Kirk Hammett, who'd replaced him and lived with the knowledge that his success came at Mustaine's expense. Robert Trujillo, the current bassist who joined long after Mustaine left, but who understood the weight of this moment. And Dave Hetfield, who'd once been one of his closest friends and had become his greatest antagonist. Who'd shared cramped vans and tiny stages with him, who'd made music with him, who'd fired him. What happened next was something nobody in that room would ever forget. Instead of the awkward, tense reunion everyone expected, something else occurred. Hetfield embraced Mustaine, not a formal handshake or a polite hug, but a real, genuine embrace between old friends. And Mustaine, who'd been fighting this band for 28 years, hugged him back. The crowd went silent. This wasn't just two musicians being professional. This was reconciliation. They played together that night. Mustaine's guitar blended with the band he'd helped create nearly 3 decades earlier. They performed songs he'd co-written, songs that had been part of the feud for years. And for those few minutes, it wasn't Metallica versus Megadeth. It wasn't rivalry or competition or resentment. It was just 5 musicians playing metal together. When the songs ended, Hetfield put his arm around Mustaine and spoke to the crowd. His voice was thick with emotion, the kind of genuine feeling that can't be faked. "This man helped build Metallica," Hetfield said, gesturing to Mustaine. "Without him, we wouldn't be here. The songs he wrote with us in 1982 are still part of who we are, and I'm grateful for everything he gave to this band. Thank you, Dave, for being here tonight. Thank you for being you."
The crowd erupted in applause. These weren't casual fans. These were people who'd followed both bands for decades, who knew every chapter of the feud, who understood the significance of this moment. Mustaine, visibly emotional, his eyes wet with tears he didn't try to hide, responded, "Thank you for having me. This means more than you know, more than I can say." It was simple, it was honest, and it was over. Not the music, but the war. After 28 years, the most famous feud in heavy metal history had ended. The impact of that night rippled far beyond the Fillmore. Video footage of the reunion spread across the internet. Metal fans around the world watched in disbelief as 2 men who'd seemed destined to hate each other forever found a way to make peace. For Mustaine, something fundamental changed. In interviews after that night, he spoke differently about Metallica.
The bitterness was gone. The constant comparisons stopped. He'd spent 28 years trying to destroy them, trying to prove they'd made a mistake, and in the end, what freed him wasn't victory, it was forgiveness. That night at the Fillmore, Mustaine said in the later interview, "I finally let go of something I'd been carrying since 1983. I realized I'd built an incredible career. Megadeth had achieved things I never imagined, but I was so focused on what I'd lost that I couldn't appreciate what I'd gained. When James hugged me on that stage, it was like a weight lifted. I didn't need revenge anymore." For Metallica, the reunion represented something equally important. They'd achieved everything a band could achieve: commercial success, critical acclaim, cultural impact, longevity. But there was always this shadow, this person they'd wronged at the beginning of their journey. Making peace with Mustaine wasn't about good publicity or fan service. It was about acknowledging that their success had cost someone something and trying to make that right. The reunion also changed how fans viewed both bands. The tribalism that had defined metal culture for decades, you were either Team Metallica or Team Megadeth, began to soften. People realized you could appreciate both, that the rivalry had been exciting, but ultimately limiting. In the years following that night, Mustaine and the Metallica members developed what could genuinely be called friendship. Not the close relationship they'd had in 1982, but something mature and respectful. They spoke highly of each other in interviews. Mustaine attended Metallica events. The animosity that had seemed permanent simply evaporated. Mustaine also used his newfound peace to reflect on his own journey with addiction and anger. He got sober, addressed his demons, and became an advocate for others struggling with similar issues. The energy he'd spent on hatred, he redirected toward creation and healing. The story of Dave Mustaine and Metallica became something larger than music. It became a testament to the possibility of reconciliation, to the idea that even the deepest wounds can heal if both sides are willing. Today, when people talk about the big four of thrash metal, the conversation is different. Instead of Metallica versus Megadeth, it's Metallica and Megadeth, two legendary bands that share history and mutual respect. That night at the Fillmore proved something important. Revenge might feel powerful, but forgiveness is transformative. Mustaine had spent 28 years trying to destroy Metallica through his success. In the end, what gave him peace wasn't defeating them, it was accepting them and being accepted by them. The war that began on a bus to California in 1983 ended on a stage in San Francisco in 2011, not with lawyers or statements or one side admitting defeat. It ended with a hug, a few songs, and the simple recognition that everyone had been hurt, everyone had made mistakes, and everyone deserved a chance to move forward. Dave Mustaine swore revenge. He built an empire on that rage. But in the end, what saved him wasn't revenge. It was letting it go. And that might be his greatest achievement of all.